is Not the Time to Panic by Kevin Wilson. Coming of age story. I really enjoyed the first half of the book. The plot, while it was kind of whimsical, but as I said, it was so grounded in reality. It felt like something that you dreamed of, maybe as a daydream when you were a kid, and this story just explored it and saw what could have happened. I thought it really captured the boredom and awkwardness of coming of age years really well. The book is divided into two parts. There is a second part, and I felt like the second part was not as interesting. So if you actually read the book, here's some spoiler thoughts. Frankie didn't really make any sense as an adult. She's so obsessed with her mantra that she made. The edge is a shanty town filled with gold seekers, we are fugitives. And the law is skinny with hunger for us. Which, see, that's the part in part one of the book, the first half of the book when she's growing up, that is actually what makes the book so interesting to read. It's like, I don't know, she just came up with all this stuff when she was a teenager, doing it with the kid that she just met that summer, and things just spiraled out of control. But it didn't make sense as an adult because even though she's had a lot of development since then, there were parts in the book where she said she went to college, right? Found people that were more like her, and she had relationships. She developed one with Aaron. It didn't make sense that despite all that development that she had, that she was still so obsessed with this part of her summer, of her childhood. If she really had developed, why is she still so obsessed? So it just didn't, her character as an adult didn't really make sense. I also thought the parts of the book where she was talking with Mazzy, the reporter, were really unneeded. So there were like three chapters in the first part of the book where Mazzy just calls and Frankie is like, oh, I don't want to talk to you because blah, blah, blah. But she still picks up the phone and talks to her, and then she like picks up and is like, no, I don't want to talk to you. And I felt like maybe the very first chapter before we even get started with her as a young person with Mazzy, it sets the scene of what's about to happen, that somebody figured out her role in all this. But then there were two more chapters, and it felt like those two just didn't even add anything to the story, especially the one in the middle. It's just smack dab in the middle. It's just smack dab in the middle of the first part. Kind of breaks the flow and the pacing of the story because you're like so invested in what is happening, and then it just stops and goes straight back to present day, and it's literally a redundant scene. Well, what is the point of this? The second part just felt flatter. Like, it wasn't as interesting and nothing really happened. I think this was really apparent when it's like all kind of building up, right? The reporter has contacted her. She's going to go public that Frankie was behind the whole panic in Coalfield, right? And so now it's all leading up to this point where she's going to meet with Zeke. And then the meeting is just boring. Like, I enjoy reading it, but if we're being objective about the plot, like what happens in the plot, nothing happens. They meet. He's like, okay, I don't want to be exposed. Okay. So then she's like, okay, fine. She tries to convince him a little bit, but then he still resists, and then she's like, fine. And we learn a little bit about what his life was like afterwards, and like how his his like parents made up, and he got with like other people, blah 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 blah. But I mean, in the overall context of the story, nothing happened. I felt like this was maybe kind of a grounding in reality attempt for this book, whereas like in real life probably nothing would happen. There wouldn't be any crazy reactions, there wouldn't be any crazy revelations. People would just get on with their lives, and that's what it felt like this chapter. Same with like her meeting with her mom. It was kind of anticlimactic in that she thought she was gonna have to explain a lot of stuff, but then her mom was just like, I already knew the whole time that you were behind it. It's like, bitch, what? Okay. And you never said anything? I guess that makes sense in the story. And then the ending, I'm kind of ambivalent about the ending. I don't think it was a bad ending, I think it was a decent, okay ending. Like, I don't even know what more you could have done, because I saw some Goodreads reviews and they were saying they wanted to read more. They wanted to see actually what the public reaction was like and then how Frankie would deal with it. And I could see why you want to see that, but I also kind of like that it ended before, because it's like now she's kind of come to terms with it, with the people in her life. Aaron, her husband, her daughter, her mom, and Ziki, they've all kind of come to terms and accepted and kind of moved on, learned how to move on from what happened and how to deal with it now as adults. So those parts of the story were resolved, so it made sense to end there. But it still felt like a semi sappy. It's just like, oh, ha ha ha, I'm talking to my kid about this because I whispered it to her, and she's like, ah, I remember. There's no way she remembered as a toddler, unless she's like a genius and has a brain like a sponge and could just take in all those auditory stimuli and keep it in her brain when she was a toddler. I felt like, honestly, the book could have ended at the end of part one. Like when Ziki and Frankie just split. And then you could have had maybe like one epilogue or a chapter afterwards talking about what happened next, like later on when they were adults. But I don't know. Part two just seemed like very unnecessary to the overall story. So I loved the descriptions of Frankie's feelings with Ziki and how awkward things were between them, and then how it slowly developed. They're making out scenes and stuff. I usually don't like reading those, or I really skim it when I read them in a lot of books, but I thought it was pretty good, pretty well done in this story. It just felt like a very wholesome but real interaction, and it just showed like how good of a relationship she actually had with her mom. The kind of fanaticism that Frankie developed, it felt very organic, because it really set up the first few chapters how she felt like an outsider. She didn't have friends, and then this kid came along into her life, and then they created this thing, this artistic thing that was their own little secret, and how she wanted to stick to it so much. Like she didn't want him to leave. She didn't want him to feel bad for what they'd done, and you could see the schism growing between her and him, and it all felt very organic, and I thought it was really well done. So I like that about part one. Plot, 4 out of 5. Pacing, 4.5 out of 5. Ending, I'd give it a 3 out of 5. Characters, 3.5 out of 5. Overall, 4 out of 5.